I paid rent to my parents every month from the day I turned 18. My younger brother is 25, still living there, and has never paid a cent. When I brought it up, my mother said 4 words that explained everything I needed to know about my childhood. Posted to r/true off my chest. There are sentences that do a lot of work in a small space. Sentences that contain, in 4 or 5 words, the full architecture of a thing that has been standing around you for years without you being able to name its exact shape. Sentences that land and keep landing, that you turn over for days afterward, because every time you turn them over you find another layer underneath. My mother's sentence was 4 words. That was different, Dominic. She said it at the kitchen table, in the house I grew up in, the same house where I had handed over $700 in cash on the first of every month from the time I was 18 years old until the day I moved out at 22. The same house where my brother Jordan, who is 25 years old and works full-time and has a car and a social life and a girlfriend who stays over 3 nights a week, has been living for free for his entire adult life. 4 words. That was different, Dominic. I've been turning them over for 3 months. I think I finally understand all the layers. I am going to tell you what I found. My name is Dominic. I am 29 years old. I have one sibling, Jordan, who is 25, and 2 parents, Margaret and Frank, who are in their late 50s and who are, by every external measurement, decent people. They worked hard. They provided. They attended school events and took us on vacations and told us they loved us with regularity and apparent sincerity. By the standards of what childhood is supposed to look like, ours looked correct. What I want to tell you about is the specific texture of how it felt from the inside, which was different from how it looked from the outside in ways I did not have language for until recently. The texture was this. The rules were not the same for Jordan and me. Not in small ways, in large, structural, life-shaping ways. And the rules were never explained as different. They were simply applied differently, and when I noticed the difference and said something, the response was always some version of "that's just how it is," or "you're being sensitive," or eventually "that was different." Let me give you the specific history because I think specificity is what this kind of story requires to be believed. I am 4 years older than Jordan. I was the first child, which in our family meant, in practice, that I was the one the rules were figured out on. I understand this in the abstract. First children are always the trial run in some sense, the ones the parents practice on before they understand what they are doing. But understanding it in the abstract does not erase what it produced in the specific. When I was 16, I got a part-time job at a hardware store. I got it because my parents told me that I needed to start understanding money and the value of work, and that I would not be getting the things I wanted, a phone upgrade, money for activities, eventually a car, unless I was contributing to them myself. I was 16. I thought this was reasonable. I got the job. I worked weekends and 2 evenings a week, and I paid for my own phone plan, and my own activities, and eventually a portion of a used car that I shared with my father. When Jordan was 16, he did not have a job. He was given an upgraded phone and money for his activities and a car at 17 that was bought for him. When I asked about this, my mother said Jordan was different. He was more sensitive, he was having a harder time in school, he needed to focus on his grades. All of this may have been true. What was also true is that no one asked me if I was sensitive or having a hard time. It was assumed I was not, and the assumption became its own kind of instruction. When I was 18, I graduated high school and started at a community college 2 towns over. I was living at home. My parents called a family meeting, which I now understand as the formal codification of something they had already decided, and told me that since I was an adult, I would be contributing to the household. They said rent was $700 a month, which was, they said, below market for the area and represented their contribution to my continuing education. They said it was about responsibility and becoming a man and understanding that the world did not give things for free. I said okay. What else do you say at 18 when the people who control your housing tell you what it costs? I paid $700 a month for 4 years. I paid it while working 30 hours a week alongside full-time classes. I paid it while building savings in whatever thin margin existed between income and the combined cost of rent, food, transportation, and school supplies. I paid it every first of the month, in cash, which my father counted and put in an envelope. I paid it without missing a month. I paid it without once being told I had done a good job doing it, because it was framed as obligation rather than as something that deserved acknowledgement. I moved out when I was 22 into a shared apartment with a college friend. I had enough saved for the deposit and first month and a modest cushion. I built a life from there. I am doing well now. I have a stable job in IT infrastructure. I have my own apartment. I have savings. I did not get there easily, but I got there, and I have always told myself that the difficulty of getting there was part of the character it built. I have been telling myself that for years. I am less sure it was the right story to be telling. Jordan is 25. He graduated from a 4-year university, the tuition of which was paid in full by my parents, which I want to note without resentment, because I think I was too far into my own financial independence by the time Jordan started college for tuition to have been part of my picture in the same way. I do not begrudge Jordan his education. Education is good, and I am glad he got one. What I am talking about is what came after the education. Jordan graduated at 22 and moved back home. He has a job, a reasonable job, nothing spectacular but a steady income. He drives a car my parents bought. He lives in his childhood bedroom, which my mother has repainted and refurnished since I left it to include a proper desk setup and a new mattress. He contributes to household chores in the minimal way of someone who has never been required to be accountable for his domestic presence. He has never paid rent. My mother cooks his dinners. My father covers the streaming subscriptions. I learned the full extent of this not in a single revelation but in pieces, over the years since I moved out, in the way that information about your family comes to you in fragments during holidays and phone calls and occasional visits. I had known Jordan did not pay rent. I had absorbed this as a feature of his age and situation, the natural softness extended to a younger child finding his way. I had been absorbing it as temporary and reasonable. What changed 3 months ago was a conversation at a holiday dinner in which the rent question moved from background knowledge to explicit acknowledgement, and in which the explicit acknowledgement produced my mother's 4 words. The dinner was not contentious until it was. It was the usual holiday configuration: my parents, Jordan, Jordan's girlfriend Priya, who I like, and me. My partner Simone was not there because she was with her own family, and her absence turned out to matter, because Simone's presence generally moderates the dynamics in ways I do not fully notice until she is not there. The conversation was ordinary until Jordan mentioned, casually, a financial decision he was trying to make. He was thinking about whether to put some savings into an investment account or keep it liquid. He described having saved a reasonable amount over the past year. My father asked a follow-up question with the engaged interest of a parent proud of a child's financial literacy. And something in me did a calculation. The calculation was, Jordan has been working for 3 years. Jordan lives rent-free. Jordan has been receiving financial support in ways both direct and indirect for his entire adult life. Jordan has been able to save that reasonable amount not primarily because of his discipline but because his baseline costs have been subsidized to a degree I did not experience. I said, and I said it without enough thought about what I was opening. It's easier to save when you're not paying rent. The table shifted in the way tables shift when something has been said that everyone pretends was said quietly, but was not. My mother said, "What do you mean by that?" I said, and I want to be honest, that my tone was not entirely neutral because I had been holding this particular thing for longer than I knew. I mean, Jordan's been living here for 3 years without paying rent, and I paid $700 a month from 18 to 22. It's not exactly the same starting line. My father looked at his plate. Jordan looked at Priya. Priya looked at her hands. My mother said, "That was different, Dominic." I want to stay in that moment for a while before I tell you what happened next, because the moment is the center of the story, and I think it deserves full attention. That was different, Dominic. She did not say how it was different. She did not offer context or explanation or a qualifier. She said the 4 words with the complete confidence of someone who believes the statement is self-evidently true, who believes that the person she is saying it to shares enough of her understanding of the world that no elaboration is necessary.
She was wrong about that.
I did not share her understanding of the world, or I did not share it anymore, or I had shared it for a long time and had reached the end of sharing it on that particular point. I looked at her across the table, and I felt something I have felt before in my family, but never as clearly as in that moment. The specific sensation of a story being told about me by people who believe they know me. A story I have not been consulted on. A story in which certain things that happen to me are categorized in ways that serve the story rather than reflect the truth. I said, "How is it different?" She said, "You were ready for it. Jordan is still figuring things out." I said, "I was 18. Jordan is 25. She said, "Everyone figures things out on their own timeline." I said, "Mom, I understand that. What I am asking is, why did my timeline require rent payments starting at 18 and Jordan's timeline, 7 years longer, hasn't required any?" My father said, "Dominic," in the tone he uses when he wants me to let something go. I did not let it go. I said, "I'm not angry. I genuinely want to understand the logic. Because from where I'm sitting, the same house, the same parents, produced two completely different experiences, and the response to me asking about it is that they were just different. I want to understand how." My mother said, "You were always so capable. You handled it." And there it was. The second sentence, doing just as much work as the first. You were always so capable.
You handled it.
I want to be precise about what those two sentences contain because I think the precision matters for anyone who has heard a version of them. That was different contains the following things. It contains the assertion that two situations that look identical from the outside are in fact different in ways that justify their different treatment, without specifying what those ways are. It functions as a conversation stopper. The burden of proof is on the person challenging the inequality rather than on the person defending it. It assumes that the speaker's categorization of the two situations is the correct one and that the person being told is simply failing to understand something obvious. It also contains, embedded in its brevity, the suggestion that asking the question at all is slightly inappropriate. That noticing the inequality is the problem, not the inequality itself. You were always so capable. You handled it contains the following things. It contains the explanation that was being withheld by the first sentence. The reason it was different is that I was capable and Jordan is not, or not yet, or not in the same way. It tells me that my capability was the justification for my harder experience, rather than being something that should have been supported and nurtured. It tells me that Jordan's difficulty is the justification for his easier experience, which is a reasonable enough position on its own, but which was never communicated to me as a position. It was simply applied, invisibly, as policy. And it tells me something else, something that I have been sitting with the longest, that being capable was its own punishment. That I was given less and required to give more because I was able to handle it. That the family's resources, material and emotional, were routed toward the person who needed them most visibly, and that my less visible needs were addressed by not addressing them because I would be fine. Because I handled things. Because I was capable. I said, "What if I wasn't fine? What if I was just not saying so?" My mother looked at me for a moment. She said, "Were you not fine?" I said, "I'm fine now. But I spent 4 years at 18 to 22 working 30 hours a week on top of full-time classes and paying you $700 a month and saving whatever was left over, and I don't think I ever once told you it was hard because I had understood that being hard was not something I got to complain about." She said, "Why didn't you say something?" And I had to stop and sit with that question because it was the most honest question she had asked, and it did not have a simple answer.
Why didn't I say something?
Because saying something had not been presented to me as an option, in the specific way that options that have never been modeled are not options. Because the family had organized around me being capable, and capable people do not say things are hard. Because at 18 you do not have the full vocabulary for what is happening to you when a structure you are inside is not fair. You just live inside it and adapt and call the adaptation character. I said, "I didn't say something because I had learned it wasn't my turn to need things." The table was very quiet. Jordan said something then that I did not expect. He said, "I didn't know." I looked at him. He was looking at his plate, not at me, in the way of someone saying something that costs him something to say. He said, "I didn't know you paid rent. I didn't know it was $700. I thought you just left when you were ready. I didn't know there was a financial arrangement." I said, "They didn't tell you?" He said, "No." I looked at my parents. My father was still looking at his plate. My mother had the expression she gets when a conversation has exceeded the parameters she had set for it, and she is processing the excess. I said, "Why wouldn't you have told him?" My mother said, "It wasn't his business." I said, "It became his business when you applied a different policy to him without telling him why. He's been living here for 3 years not knowing that his older brother paid rent for 4 years. That's not protecting him. That's just keeping the information separate so no one has to compare."
My father looked up then.
He said quietly, "We didn't think of it that way." I said, "How did you think of it?" He said, "We thought we were doing what was best for each of you, at different times." I said, "I believe that. I genuinely do. But what was best for Jordan at 25 was not what was required of me at 18, and I am asking you to be honest with yourself about whether that's because you understood our needs differently, or because Jordan asked for things and I didn't." The table was quiet for a long time. Jordan said, "I would have paid if they had asked." He said it without drama, without performance. He said it like a simple fact. I would have paid if asked. The asking just had not happened. The asking had happened to me and not to him, and neither of us had been given the full picture of what was happening to the other. The conversation did not resolve that evening. Conversations like this rarely resolve in a single dinner over cold holiday food. What happened instead was that my father said he wanted to talk more properly, not at the table with the food getting cold. My mother said she needed some time to think. Jordan said he was going to talk to them this week. I said okay to all of it and helped clear the table and drove home and called Simone from the car. Simone listened to everything. When I was done, she said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Like something finally has a name." She said, "What was the thing without a name?" I said, "The sense that I had been required to be a different person than Jordan in ways that were never explained, and that I had spent years calling a difference in our personalities when it was actually a difference in how we were treated." She said, "Yeah." I said, "I don't know if they meant it." She said, "I don't think meaning matters as much as we think it does. The effect was the same whether or not they meant it." She was right about that. The effect was the same. I had paid rent, and Jordan had not. I had worked through college, and Jordan had not needed to. I had built savings in the narrow margin between income and obligation, and Jordan had been able to build savings from a much more comfortable margin. I had learned to be capable because capable was required of me, and I had paid for that learning in ways Jordan had not been asked to pay. Whether my parents meant any of it is a different question from whether it happened. It happened. The conversation with my father happened the following week. He called me on a Wednesday evening, which was unusual enough that I knew before I answered that it was the real conversation. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner." I said, "I have too." He said, "I want to be honest with you. I think you're right that we treated you and Jordan differently." I said, "Thank you for saying that." He said, "I don't think we did it consciously. You were the kind of kid who, you came home from your first day of work at 16, and you told us what you had earned, and you had already calculated how much you'd have at the end of the month, and you seemed proud of it. And I think we saw that, and thought that was who you were." And Jordan was different. More uncertain. He needed more support. I said, "I understand that. I think what I want you to hear is that I needed support too. I just didn't show it in a way that registered as need. And the system we built rewarded me for not showing need by treating my not showing it as evidence that I didn't have it." He said, "That's a hard thing to hear." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry, Dominic." He said it simply, not elaborately, not with conditions. He said I'm sorry, and he let it stand on its own without asking me immediately to receive it as sufficient. That is harder than it sounds. I received it. I said, "I don't want Jordan to start paying rent as a retroactive correction. That's not what this is about." He said, "What is it about?" I said, "Knowing that you see it, that you understand what happened, that if anyone ever asks about our childhood, you don't tell them we were treated the same, because we weren't." He said, "We weren't." I said, "Thank you." He said, "I'm going to talk to your mother." I said, "I know you will." The conversation with my mother took longer to come and was harder when it arrived. She called me the following Saturday, and we talked for an hour and 20 minutes, and the hour and 20 minutes contained more honesty about our family than any other conversation we have had in my adult life. She said, "I've been trying to understand why I said that was different and why I said it so quickly." Without explaining, I said, "What did you come up with?" She said, "I think I believed it so completely that I didn't think it needed explanation. In my mind it was obvious. You were the older one. You were ready. Jordan needed more runway." I said, "And you never thought about whether I might have needed runway too?" She said, I thought the fact that you didn't ask for it meant you didn't need it. I know that's not necessarily right." I said, "I didn't ask for it because I didn't know I was allowed to. The family had made it clear that you only asked for things if you really needed them, and you were the one who decided if the need was real enough. And I had learned that my needs weren't going to pass that test." She was quiet for a long time. She said, "When did you learn that?" I said, "I think I learned it gradually. Every time something was explained by the fact that Jordan needed more. Every time my handling things smoothly was treated as proof that everything was fine. Every time I noticed the difference and said something and was told it was different." She said, "I said that a lot." I said, "You said it every time." She said, "I was wrong." She said it clearly and without elaboration. 2 words doing as much work as her previous 4, but different work. Better work. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "What do I do with it?" I said, "You know it now. That's what you do with it. You know it, and when Jordan does something that reminds you of what you asked of me at his age, you notice the difference. And I'm not asking you to fix it retroactively, because it's done and I'm fine. I'm genuinely fine. I built something and I'm proud of it. I'm just asking that you know what it cost." She said, "I know." She said, "You deserved more runway." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm sorry." She meant it. I believe she meant it. And I also understand that meaning something and having done something are not the same thing, that the sorry does not erase the 4 years, or the $700 a month, or the 30-hour weeks alongside full-time classes, or the decade of being the capable one who handled things while Jordan had the luxury of not handling things quite yet. It doesn't erase any of it. But it is the beginning of a different kind of being known in my family, and that is worth something. I am still deciding how much. Jordan and I had dinner, just the 2 of us, in February.
He suggested it.
I said yes. We went to a Thai restaurant near his work. We ordered too much food and ate most of it and talked for 2.5 hours, and the conversation was one of the strangest and most valuable I have had with my brother in my adult life. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. About the rent. And about all of it." I said, "What did you come up with?" He said, "I think I've been living in a version of our family that isn't the same as the version you lived in. And I didn't know that. I thought we had the same childhood." I said, "In some ways we did." He said, "But not in the ways that mattered financially." I said, "Not in those ways, no." He said, "I started paying rent." I looked at him. He said, "After the dinner I talked to Mom and Dad, and I said I wanted to start contributing. They said it wasn't necessary. I said I disagreed. We settled on $500 a month." I said, "Jordan," he said, "I'm not doing it for you. I mean, I am, partly. I'm doing it because I understood something after the dinner that I hadn't understood before, which is that I've been in a situation that was comfortable for me and uncomfortable for you in ways I wasn't aware of. And I can't fix the past, but I can stop letting it continue as the present." I said, "You didn't know." He said, "No, but I know now." We sat with that for a moment. I said, "How does it feel to pay rent?" He said, clarifying, "Is that weird?" I said, "No. I understand exactly what you mean." He said, "I think I understand you better now that I'm doing the thing you did." I said, "It's different for you. You're doing it voluntarily, with savings behind you, in a situation you chose. I was doing it at 18 with no savings and no choice." he said. I know. That's not lost on me. He reached across the table and did something he has not done since we were kids. He put his hand briefly on my forearm and said, I'm sorry you did that alone. I said, I know. He said, we should have more dinners. Just us. I said, yeah, we should. I want to close with what I have been sitting with since all of this happened because I think the sitting with is the most honest part of any story and the part that is usually left out. I am not defined by the $700 a month. I am not defined by the 30-hour work weeks or the 4 years of paying for the privilege of living in a house that was my home before it became a transaction. I built what I built. I am genuinely proud of it. The capability that was required of me early became something that was mine, something that I carry forward as resource rather than as wound. But I am also not willing to tell myself anymore that the difference between my experience and Jordan's was purely a difference in our personalities or our readiness or our individual timelines. It was a difference in how the family resources were allocated based on assessments of need that were never made transparent, never explained, never applied with any visible consistency. It was a difference that was maintained by the belief that I was handling it, which was maintained by the fact that I had learned not to show when I was not. That was different, Dominic. It was different. But not in the way my mother meant. It was different in the way that the same situation looks different depending on which child you are looking at, and the way you look is shaped by what you expect to see, and what you expect to see is shaped by what you have decided, consciously or not, about which of your children needs protecting. I needed protecting too. I handled things because that is who I was required to be. I am still handling things. The difference now is that I know I had a choice, and that the choice was made for me before I was old enough to make it for myself, and that knowing it was made for me is the beginning of being able to make different choices for myself now.
The work week is mine now.
The money is mine now. The apartment with Simone, the savings account, the promotion I just got in March, those are mine. Not given. Not subsidized. Earned in full, from the margin, the way I was taught. I am glad I was taught that. I am also finally, after 29 years, allowed to say that I wished it had been a choice. Update: 4 months after the original post. Several things have settled into a new shape, and I want to document them. Jordan is on month 4 of paying rent. My parents have, apparently, stopped arguing with him about whether it is necessary. My father told me on a Sunday call that Jordan had set up an automatic transfer, so it goes without anyone having to ask or remember. He said this in the way he mentions things about Jordan that make him proud, and I received it as exactly that, a thing that makes him proud that makes me proud too, and that also did not need to happen except that Jordan decided it needed to happen. That decision tells me everything I needed to know about who he is underneath the situation he was raised inside. My mother and I have been talking differently. Not dramatically differently. She is who she is, and I am not expecting a transformation. And the honest truth is that I do not need one. What I need is what I have been getting, which is a slightly more honest version of our conversations. She asks me about work, and when I tell her something that is hard, she does not immediately pivot to something reassuring. She lets it be hard for a moment first. That is new. I notice it every time. Simone and I had a long conversation in March about our own possible family, which is not the subject of this post but is relevant to it in the sense that I have been thinking a great deal about what I want to carry forward into any future family structure we build. What I want to carry forward is the work ethic and the capability and the pride in having built something. What I do not want to carry forward is the invisibility, the assumption that the capable child does not need asking, does not need checking on, does not need the runway that is extended automatically to the one whose need is more visible. If I have 2 children, I will know both of their needs. I will ask the one who handles things if they are fine. I will not assume the handling is an answer. That is the thing. That is the whole thing, really. Ask the one who handles things if they are fine. Do not let the handling be the answer. I was asked that question for the first time at a family dinner 3 months ago by my own mother, out of order, too late, in response to my asking why the rules had been different. Better late than never. And Simone asked me last Tuesday for no particular reason, over dinner at home, not connected to any of this. She just looked at me and said, "Are you actually fine?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah." For the first time in a while, actually, yes. She said, "Good," and handed me the bread. That is what it feels like when someone asks and waits for the real answer.